Some of the most comforting meals in American history were never fancy. They were simple, quick, and made with whatever families had on hand. In old kitchens across the country, busy parents relied on inexpensive suppers that could be prepared in just minutes after a long day of work. Many of those meals came from handwritten recipe cards, church cookbooks, and early Betty Crocker pamphlets. Today, most of them have quietly disappeared from our tables. In this video, we're bringing back 10 cheap vintage suppers that once fed millions of Americans and could be ready in about 10 minutes. Some may surprise you, and one might remind you of home. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Long before fast food drive-thrus existed, American families relied on simple meals that could be made quickly with inexpensive ingredients. One supper that appeared in countless kitchens during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s was creamed chipped beef on toast. It was humble, filling, and could be prepared in just minutes, which made it perfect for busy evenings when time and money were both tight. The dish became especially popular during the Great Depression and later during World War II. Dried beef was cheap, easy to store, and widely available in grocery stores across the country. Many households kept a small jar of it in the pantry for quick meals. When dinner needed to appear fast, this simple recipe was often the answer. The preparation was straightforward. Butter melted in a skillet, followed by a spoonful of flour to create a light roux. Milk was slowly added, turning the mixture into a creamy white sauce. Thin strips of chipped dried beef were stirred into the sauce and warmed through. Within minutes, the rich mixture was poured over slices of toasted bread. For families trying to stretch every dollar, this meal was satisfying and practical. The creamy sauce made a small amount of meat go a long way, feeding several people without much cost. Some cooks added a pinch of black pepper or a dash of paprika, but most kept it simple. For decades, creamed chipped beef on toast appeared on breakfast tables, lunch plates, and dinner menus. It was a meal that required little effort yet delivered comfort after a long day. Today, many younger generations have never tasted it. But in its time, this quick 10-minute supper was one of the most familiar meals in American homes, quietly filling kitchens with its warm, creamy aroma. Tomato soup and grilled cheese supper. In many American homes during the 1940s and 1950s, supper didn't always mean a large, complicated meal. Sometimes, the most comforting dinners were the simplest ones. One classic combination that families relied on again and again was tomato soup served alongside a hot grilled cheese sandwich. This quick supper became especially popular as canned foods became common in grocery stores. Companies began producing ready-made tomato soup that only needed a little water or milk and a few minutes on the stove. For busy parents, this meant dinner could be prepared almost instantly without sacrificing warmth or flavor. While the soup heated in a pot, a skillet would already be warming on the stove. Slices of bread were buttered lightly, and a piece of American cheese was placed between them. The sandwich was then toasted in the skillet until the bread turned golden brown and the cheese melted into a soft, creamy layer. The pairing worked perfectly. The rich, slightly tangy soup balanced the buttery crunch of the sandwich. Many people remember dipping pieces of grilled cheese directly into the warm tomato soup, creating a comforting bite that felt both simple and satisfying. For families watching their grocery budgets, this supper was also incredibly affordable. A single can of soup and a few slices of bread and cheese could easily feed 2 or 3 people. It was the kind of meal that required little planning and almost no preparation time. During cold evenings or rainy afternoons, the smell of tomato soup simmering on the stove often filled American kitchens. It became a familiar comfort food that many children grew up with. Even today, this classic combination remains one of the quickest vintage suppers ever served in American homes, proving that sometimes the simplest meals leave the strongest memories. Fried bologna sandwich. In the middle decades of the 20th century, few suppers were as quick, cheap, and satisfying as the fried bologna sandwich. It was the kind of meal that appeared on kitchen tables across America when time was short and the pantry offered only a few simple ingredients. bologna had become a popular grocery staple by the 1940s and 1950s. It was inexpensive, widely available, and could be stored in the refrigerator for days. For many families trying to stretch their food budget, it was a dependable ingredient that could quickly become the center of a meal. Preparing this supper was almost effortless. A thick slice of bologna was placed in a hot skillet and fried for a minute or two on each side. As the meat heated, its edges often curled upward, and the surface developed a slightly crispy texture. Many cooks cut a small slit in the center of the slice to keep it from curling too much while frying. Meanwhile, 2 slices of bread were lightly toasted or warmed in the same pan. Once the bologna was ready, it was placed between the bread, sometimes with a slice of cheese melting on top. A touch of mustard or mayonnaise was often added, though many people preferred the sandwich just as it was. The result was simple but satisfying. The warm bread and sizzling bologna created a savory flavor that made the sandwich feel more like a real supper than a quick snack. For busy households, it was the perfect 10-minute solution. A single skillet, a few ingredients, and dinner was ready before the evening had barely begun. Today, the fried bologna sandwich is often remembered with a sense of nostalgia. For many Americans who grew up in small towns or working families, it was a familiar taste of childhood and a reminder of how simple suppers once brought people together around the kitchen table. Creamed peas on toast. In many American kitchens during the 1930s and 1940s, supper didn't always require meat. When groceries were limited or money needed to stretch further, families often turned to simple vegetable dishes that could still feel warm and satisfying. One such meal was creamed peas on toast. This supper appeared frequently in old community cookbooks and household guides from the early 20th century. Frozen and canned peas had begun to appear in stores, making them easy to keep on hand. With just a few basic ingredients, a filling meal could be prepared in minutes. The process began with butter melting slowly in a small saucepan. A spoonful of flour was stirred in, creating a simple roux. Milk was then added gradually, forming a smooth, creamy white sauce. Once the sauce thickened, a cup of peas was stirred into the mixture and gently heated. Meanwhile, slices of bread were toasted until lightly crisp. The creamy peas were then spooned generously over the toast, soaking into the bread and creating a soft, comforting dish. For many families, this supper was both practical and nourishing. Peas provided a touch of sweetness and color, while the creamy sauce made the meal feel hearty despite its simplicity. A pinch of salt and black pepper was usually enough to finish the dish. Children often enjoyed this meal because of its mild flavor, and parents appreciated how quickly it came together. It was the type of supper that appeared when the day had been long and the kitchen needed to produce something warm without much effort. Although creamed peas on toast rarely appears on modern dinner tables, it once played a quiet but important role in American home cooking. In less than 10 minutes, it could turn a few humble ingredients into a comforting meal. Egg in a whole toast. In many American homes during the 1940s and 1950s, supper sometimes came together with little more than bread, butter, and an egg. One clever dish that appeared in countless kitchens was egg in a whole toast. It was quick, filling, and required almost no preparation, which made it perfect for busy evenings. The idea behind the dish was wonderfully simple. A slice of bread was placed on a cutting board, and a small hole was cut in the center using a glass or the rim of a cup. Meanwhile, a skillet warmed on the stove with a small amount of butter melting across its surface. The bread was then placed into the hot skillet, and a fresh egg was cracked directly into the hole in the center. As the bread toasted, the egg cooked at the same time, creating a meal that was both crispy and soft in one bite. After a minute or two, the bread was carefully flipped so the egg could finish cooking on the other side. The small round piece of bread that had been cut out was often toasted in the pan as well. Children sometimes called it the dipper, using it to scoop up the soft egg yolk. For families trying to prepare dinner quickly, this meal was ideal. Eggs were inexpensive and easy to keep in the refrigerator, while bread was already a daily staple in most households. With just a few ingredients, A warm supper could appear on the table in minutes. Over the years, this dish gained many different nicknames depending on the region. Some people called it toad in the hole, while others knew it as one-eyed Jack or bullseye eggs. Today, egg-in-a-hole toast still appears occasionally at breakfast tables, but in earlier decades it was also a reliable supper. It proved that sometimes the simplest ideas created the most memorable meals. Tuna melt on toast. During the 1950s and 1960s, canned tuna became one of the most dependable ingredients in American kitchens. It was inexpensive, easy to store, and could quickly turn into a satisfying meal. One supper that many families relied on during busy evenings was the simple but comforting tuna melt on toast. The dish usually began with a small bowl and a can of tuna. The fish was drained and mixed with a spoonful of mayonnaise, along with a pinch of salt and black pepper. Some cooks added finely chopped celery or a bit of onion for extra flavor, but many households kept the mixture plain and simple. Meanwhile, slices of bread were lightly toasted or placed on a baking sheet. A generous spoonful of the tuna mixture was spread across each slice. Then a piece of cheese, often American or cheddar, was placed on top. The open-faced sandwiches were then slid under a broiler or placed into a hot skillet with a lid. Within a few minutes, the cheese began to melt and bubble, blending with the warm tuna mixture underneath. What made the tuna melt so popular was its perfect balance of flavors and textures. The creamy tuna filling paired with the melted cheese, while the toasted bread provided a light crunch. It felt hearty enough to be a full supper but required very little effort. For families watching their grocery budget, canned tuna was a reliable pantry staple. One small can could easily make 2 or 3 servings, especially when paired with bread and cheese. Across diners, lunch counters, and home kitchens, the tuna melt became a familiar sight on American plates. Even though it could be prepared in less than 10 minutes, it delivered the kind of warm comfort people expected from a homemade meal. Today, the tuna melt still appears occasionally, but many people forget how often it once saved the day at supper time. Corned beef hash from the skillet. In the 1940s and 1950s, canned meats were a common sight in American pantries. They were affordable, lasted for months on the shelf, and could quickly become a full meal when time was short. One of the most popular quick suppers made from these pantry staples was corned beef hash cooked in a hot skillet. Corned beef hash was often sold already mixed in a can, containing chopped corned beef and diced potatoes. For many families, it was the perfect solution for evenings when cooking needed to be fast and simple. With just one pan and a few minutes on the stove, dinner could be ready. Preparing it was as easy as opening the can and sliding the mixture into a heated skillet with a little butter or cooking oil. As it cooked, the potatoes and beef began to brown on the bottom, creating a crispy layer that many people considered the best part of the dish. Some cooks stirred the hash occasionally, while others pressed it down and let it form a golden crust before flipping sections over. The smell of sizzling beef and potatoes quickly filled the kitchen, signaling that supper was nearly ready. For an extra touch, many households cracked 1 or 2 eggs into the pan near the end of cooking. The eggs fried gently alongside the hash, turning the simple dish into a heartier meal. Corned beef hash became a familiar comfort food for working families. It required almost no preparation, and the ingredients were already combined in the can, saving both time and effort. Even though it was simple, the dish delivered a rich, savory flavor that felt satisfying after a long day. In less than 10 minutes, a skillet of corned beef hash could feed a small family and bring everyone together at the table for a warm, dependable supper. Sloppy Joe's Skillet Supper. In post-World War II America, families were looking for meals that were quick, affordable, and satisfying. One of the most beloved 10-minute suppers that emerged from this era was the Sloppy Joe, a simple ground beef dish served hot from a skillet onto soft hamburger buns. Originally inspired by loose meat sandwiches from the Midwest, the Sloppy Joe became a household favorite in the 1950s. Busy parents loved it because it required very little preparation. Canned tomato sauce or ketchup, a splash of water, and a few seasonings could transform a small amount of ground beef into a flavorful, saucy filling for sandwiches. The method was straightforward. Ground beef was browned in a skillet, drained if necessary, then simmered briefly with tomato sauce, onions, and a touch of sugar or Worcestershire sauce. The mixture cooked quickly, allowing the flavors to meld while keeping the meat tender and juicy. Once the filling was ready, it was spooned generously onto hamburger buns. The result was messy, tangy, and utterly satisfying. A meal that could feed a hungry family in less than 10 minutes. For children, the Sloppy Joe had a special charm. Its sweet and savory flavor, combined with the soft bun, made it a favorite after school or during busy weeknights. Parents appreciated that it stretched a small amount of beef to feed multiple mouths, making it both economical and practical. While today the Sloppy Joe is often associated with casual diners or nostalgic cookbooks, it was originally a solution for real families facing the pressures of a fast-paced, post-war household. Its place in American culinary history comes from being a meal that balanced speed, affordability, and comforting flavor. Even decades later, the Sloppy Joe remains a symbol of simple, quick, and satisfying home cooking, reminding us that some of the best suppers were those that required little more than a skillet, a few ingredients, and 10 minutes of attention. Hot dog skillet dinner. Long before convenience foods dominated the grocery aisles, American families often relied on one of the simplest 10-minute suppers, the hot dog skillet dinner. It was cheap, quick, and endlessly adaptable, perfect for households juggling work, school, and chores. This meal usually began with a few basic ingredients: sliced hot dogs, chopped onions, and sometimes diced potatoes or canned vegetables. In a hot skillet, a little butter or oil heated up while the onions softened and released their sweet aroma. Sliced hot dogs were added next, sizzling and browning slightly as they cooked. If potatoes were included, they were pre-cooked or thinly sliced to ensure they cooked through quickly. The beauty of this supper was in its simplicity. Once all ingredients were combined in the skillet, a little salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of ketchup or tomato sauce was stirred in. In just a few minutes, the mixture was heated through, and the savory aroma filled kitchens across the country. For families on a budget, this meal was ideal. Hot dogs were inexpensive, versatile, and required almost no preparation. The skillet method meant there was little cleanup, and the meal could easily feed 2 or 3 people with minimal effort. Children often loved it for its casual, hands-on appeal, spooning the mixture onto plates, dipping bread, or enjoying it straight from the skillet. For parents, it was a dependable solution when the day had been long and energy was low. Though today it might seem humble, the hot dog skillet dinner was once a staple in American homes. It demonstrates how creativity, a hot skillet, and a few pantry ingredients could turn simple, inexpensive foods into a warm, satisfying supper in just 10 minutes. This unassuming meal remains a nostalgic reminder of quick, comforting home cooking from decades past. Open-faced liver and onion sandwich. In mid-20th century America, liver and onions were considered a hearty, nutritious supper, especially during the 1940s and 1950s when families were mindful of both cost and health. While liver was inexpensive and rich in iron, it wasn't always the most popular choice among children. To make it more approachable and quicker to serve, cooks often turned it into an open-faced sandwich, a dish that could be on the table in 10 minutes or less. The preparation began with slicing the liver thinly. A hot skillet was lightly greased with butter or oil, and the liver slices were cooked just until browned. Overcooking was avoided, as it could make the meat tough. Onions were sautéed in the same pan, becoming soft and slightly caramelized, releasing their sweet aroma to complement the rich flavor of the liver. Meanwhile, slices of bread were lightly toasted. Once the liver and onions were ready, they were piled generously on each slice, creating an open-faced sandwich that was as practical as it was flavorful. A touch of salt and pepper was often all that was needed to finish the dish, though some households added a small pat of butter or a dash of gravy if available. This supper was quick, affordable, and filling. A single package of liver could feed an entire family, and the onions added volume and flavor without adding cost. It became a reliable solution for evenings when a fast, nourishing meal was required. While it has faded from modern menus, the open-faced liver and onion sandwich holds a place in American culinary history as a symbol of practical, no-nonsense home cooking. It demonstrates how resourceful cooks turn simple, inexpensive ingredients into a warm, satisfying supper in mere minutes, reminding us that some of the fastest meals were also among the most nutritious. Even today, tasting it offers a glimpse into kitchens of the past, where speed, thrift, and flavor met around the family table. And there you have it, 10 quick, inexpensive suppers that once filled American kitchens with warmth, flavor, and nostalgia. From creamed chipped beef to open-faced liver sandwiches, these meals show how families relied on simple ingredients, clever techniques, and a little creativity to feed hungry households in 10 minutes or less. Many of these recipes have faded from our modern tables, but they remain a testament to resourcefulness, comfort, and tradition. If you enjoyed stepping back into these forgotten kitchens, don't forget to subscribe to America's Lost Recipes, where every dish tells a story and every bite revives a piece of history.